I'm going to be brutally honest with you right from the start. This is one of those stories I wish I could forget. It's the kind of shift that wakes you up in the middle of the night months later, the kind that forces you to question who you trust inside a hospital. So before I tell you what happened, just know this. If I hadn't walked into that room at the exact second I did, my patient wouldn't be alive today. And the worst part? It wasn't an accident caused by the patient, or the equipment, or some random, unpredictable complication. No, it was caused by a doctor. A doctor who should have known better. A doctor who almost ended my patient's life with his own hands. I remember that evening clearly because nothing felt special about it at first. Hospitals train you to detect patterns. Your brain automatically sorts tones of alarms, running footsteps, even the breathing rhythms of patients. After a while, you just feel it when something is off. But that night began quietly. My unit was full, but manageable. I'd already done my assessments, given meds, charted like my life depended on it, and was finally catching up on hydration like a normal human being for the first time in 6 hours. My patient, let's call him Daniel, was a middle-aged man recovering from a complicated abdominal surgery. He was stable, or at least stable enough for post-op day 1, which usually means pain, discomfort, and about a dozen questions every hour. But Daniel wasn't like most patients. He was polite, calm, and deeply afraid of being a bother. He apologized every single time he pressed the call button. I kept telling him he didn't need to apologize, that I was there to help him, and I meant it. I genuinely liked him. The surgeon assigned to Daniel was a well-known figure in the hospital, the type with a reputation big enough to fill a hallway before he even stepped into it. Some staff members admired him, some avoided him, and some, like me, stayed professionally neutral because you learn quickly in healthcare that egos can be more dangerous than scalpels. But even with that in mind, I wasn't prepared for what I saw that night. Around 8 p.m., I was doing one last check on my patients before shift change. Daniel had reported some increasing pain earlier, but nothing unusual for major surgery. Pain spikes happen all the time. It's part of healing. But something kept gnawing at me. A tiny pull in my gut telling me to look in on him again before I sat down to chart. When I walked into his room, the lights were dim, and Daniel was lying still, breathing shallowly. Not alarming in itself. But I noticed a fresh IV bag hanging that I hadn't hung, and his pump showed a medication programmed in that I hadn't given him. At first, I thought maybe pharmacy had delivered something on a delay, or another nurse had covered for a moment while I was tied up. It happens. But the more I looked, the more my stomach tightened. It wasn't his scheduled medication. It wasn't even on his MAR. My brain snapped straight into crisis mode. I checked his vitals, heart rate elevated, blood pressure starting to drop, oxygen saturation creeping downward. He looked dazed, almost like someone hit a dimmer switch inside his head. And then it hit me like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a new medication. This was a high-risk medication, one that could absolutely spiral a post-op patient if given too fast, or worse, if given without proper monitoring. And the dose? It was wrong. Not a little wrong. Not borderline wrong. Disastrously wrong. Seconds mattered now. I stopped the infusion, grabbed a flush, checked his airway, called his name firmly, and watched him struggle to respond. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I hit the call light and yelled into the hallway for help. My hands were steady, but inside, panic was clawing at my spine. Within moments, another nurse rushed in, followed by a tech. We started interventions, paged rapid response, drew labs, got him on supplemental oxygen, all while Daniel's eyes fluttered like he was drifting somewhere dark. I kept my voice calm for him, but inside, I was furious. Nothing about this made sense. Nothing about this was routine. That's when the surgeon walked in. He didn't look worried. He didn't even look surprised. He walked in like someone checking their watch, like this was all part of his plan. And I swear to you, something inside me snapped. Because when he saw the stopped infusion, he actually said, "Why did you stop that? He needs it." I turned to him, genuinely stunned. "Doctor, this medication isn't on his MIR. His vitals crashed. This dose is unsafe for him right now." He waved his hand like I was being dramatic. Like Daniel wasn't on the edge of spiraling into a code. "I know what I'm doing," he said, stepping toward the pump like he intended to start it again. I blocked him. I physically stepped between him and the pump. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Another nurse behind me inhaled sharply. Confronting a doctor like that, especially one with power, one with influence, is something you don't do unless you're absolutely sure. And I was sure, 100% sure. "Doctor, with all due respect," I said, my voice calm but firm. "If you restart that infusion, he will not tolerate it. We need rapid response in the room now." His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he thought he could intimidate me. "I said he needs it. Do not undermine my orders." But they weren't his orders. Not officially. Nothing was charted. Nothing was verified. And the dose was reckless. At that moment, the rapid response team walked in, 2 critical care nurses and a respiratory therapist. Thank God. I stepped aside to brief them while the surgeon backed up, annoyed, arms crossed like someone inconvenienced by basic safety. I explained everything. What I found, the dose, Daniel's vitals, the medication type. The rapid response nurse's eyes widened immediately. "Who hung that?" she asked. Before I could speak, the surgeon cut in sharply. "I did." There was a long, heavy silence, the kind that fills a room like thick fog. The rapid response nurse looked at him, then at Daniel, then at the bag, then back at him. "You hung this?" she repeated, as if making sure she heard correctly. "Yes," he said, chin high, tone clipped. He needed it. Her expression hardened. "This dose is unsafe for a patient in his condition, and nothing was ordered or documented." The surgeon scoffed. "I don't have time to type every single move I make. I know what I'm doing." No one said anything, but the air in the room changed. Because there are mistakes. And then there's arrogance masquerading as expertise. I could feel anger simmering in every person there. We were fighting to stabilize a patient, while the very person responsible for his safety stood there arguing that the rules didn't apply to him. We worked fast. Oxygen support, fluids, medication reversal, monitoring. Every second felt like walking a tightrope in a storm. Daniel was pale and sweating, fighting to stay awake. I held his hand and kept telling him to breathe with me, to stay with me. I could feel him trembling. After about 20 minutes of interventions, his vitals finally began to stabilize. His blood pressure climbed back up, his pulse slowed, and his breathing evened out. Relief washed over me in a wave so strong it almost knocked me over. He was okay. He was really okay. Meanwhile, the surgeon had stepped back into the corner of the room, arms crossed, glaring like we were all incompetent. Like we had somehow inconvenienced him by preventing a catastrophe. A critical care nurse finally turned to him and said bluntly, "Doctor, this could have gone very wrong." He didn't answer. He just walked out of the room without looking at any of us. No explanation, no acknowledgement, no apology, nothing. And that, right there, is when my fear turned into fury. Because mistakes? Those happen. We're human. We all make errors, even in medicine. But this wasn't an accident. This was negligence wrapped in ego. A man so convinced of his own superiority that he put a patient's life at risk because he thought he didn't need to follow protocol. After the room calmed and Daniel stabilized, I stepped outside to chart everything. My hands were still shaking, part rage, part adrenaline, part disbelief. Another nurse walked up to me and said quietly, "You know you probably saved his life, right?" but I didn't feel heroic. I felt sick, because the truth is, if I hadn't walked in at that exact moment, if I had delayed even 3 minutes, if I had trusted that the doctor always knows best, Daniel would have crashed hard and fast, and we all know how that could have ended. And that's the moment when something inside me shifted forever. I realized that sometimes the biggest danger to a patient isn't the illness, the injury, or the complications. Sometimes it's the people who think they're above accountability. I checked on Daniel again later that night. He was awake, exhausted, but coherent. He looked up at me with eyes full of confusion and fear. "What happened?" he asked. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Patients deserve honesty, but they also deserve peace. I softened my voice. "You had a reaction to a medication, but we handled it. You're safe now." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then he whispered, "Thank you." Those 2 words cracked something open in me, because I couldn't stop thinking about how close he came to a very different outcome, and how easily that outcome could have been dismissed as a complication, a tragic turn, something unpredictable, when in reality, it was entirely preventable. The rest of my shift felt like moving underwater. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the pump, the dose, the doctor's reaction, the rapid response team, Daniel's eyes fading. It haunted me. Still does. But the story doesn't end there. Not even close. Because after that night, everything changed. How the staff viewed that doctor, what administration found out, what was uncovered behind the scenes, how the doctor responded when confronted, and the ripple effect his actions had on every nurse who ever crossed his path again. And let me tell you, what happened next was even worse than what happened in that room. I wish I could tell you that after Daniel stabilized, the situation resolved itself, that the doctor reflected on what happened, that leadership intervened immediately, that justice moved swiftly. But that's not how hospitals work, not always. Not when politics, hierarchy, and ego sit in the same room as patient care. When shift change rolled around, I stayed extra to brief the night nurse because I didn't trust handing this off with a simple chart note. She listened with wide eyes, and when I finished, she said something that froze me. "You're not the first nurse to have a problem with him." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the hallway, lowered her voice, and said, "There have been other incidents. Some minor, some not so minor. But nothing's ever been officially addressed because he's, well, him." She didn't need to explain further. His status, his reputation, his connections, they were shields. I walked to my car that night feeling hollow. The kind of hollow that doesn't come from exhaustion, but from disillusionment. I sat behind the wheel with the silence pressing against my chest like a weight. Nurses are trained to advocate for patients. We're the eyes and ears, the ones who catch things before they spiral. But what do you do when the danger comes from someone higher up? Someone untouchable? The next morning, I returned to work determined. I filed an incident report, not the watered-down, vague version some people submit to avoid conflict, but a detailed, time-stamped, factual account. Every action, every vital sign, every statement. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't have to. The truth was damning enough. A few hours into my shift, I was called into the nurse manager's office. She was sitting with a tight expression, one that said, "I support you, but I'm stuck between truth and politics." She asked me to walk her through the incident verbally. Everything I had written, plus the doctor's behavior, his decision-making, and his reaction when we intervened. I laid it all out. When I finished, she sighed and pressed her fingers to her temples. "I'm going to escalate this," she said. "But you need to understand. Things may move slowly, and you may get pushback." Pushback. That word tasted like metal in my mouth. In healthcare, pushback often means retaliation disguised as concern, intimidation disguised as mentorship, and pressure disguised as professional advice. Still, I said, I understand. But someone has to do something. What if I hadn't walked in? What if another nurse had assumed it was a valid order? What if the next patient isn't as lucky? She nodded, but her eyes were heavy. She knew. She'd seen it before. The sad truth is that sometimes the system protects the powerful more than the vulnerable. Later that day, the doctor confronted me. It happened in the hallway, between rounds, with the subtle aggression of someone who thinks they're above being questioned. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path, his posture stiff, his expression cold. "I saw your report," he said. I met his gaze calmly. I documented the events accurately. His jaw clenched. "You're overreacting. You don't understand surgical medicine." "I understand patient safety," I replied, "and I understand what the dosage could have done." He scoffed, leaning in closer. "You think you saved him? You think you know better than me?" "I know he lived," I said quietly, "and I know why." That pushed him over the edge. His eyes narrowed, his voice dropping low. "Be careful. Nurses who try to play hero often find themselves replaced." The threat was clear. He wasn't even trying to hide it. But here's the thing he didn't expect. I don't scare easily, especially when someone's arrogance almost costs a life. I stepped forward, gently but firmly reclaiming my space. "I'm not interested in being a hero," I said. "I'm interested in preventing preventable harm. And if that bothers you, that's not my problem." He stormed off without another word, muttering something under his breath. A few nearby staff members exchanged uneasy looks. They'd heard enough to know something ugly had happened. Over the next few days, whispers traveled fast through the unit. Nurses came up to me quietly, some thanking me, some warning me to be careful, some sharing stories of their own. Times he'd overridden safety protocols. Times he'd snapped at nurses or belittled them. Times he'd cut corners because he was in a hurry, or tired, or simply wanted things his way. One nurse told me she once caught him giving contraindicated medication to a patient with an allergy clearly marked in red on the chart. Another said he'd refused to listen when a patient showed signs of internal bleeding because he thought the nurse was overreacting. Someone else said she had documented concerns before, but nothing had come of it. I realized then that what happened to Daniel wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, one everyone tolerated because the consequences of speaking up were too high. But this time, the outcome had been too close, too obvious, too dangerous to bury. A week later, I was called into a meeting with administration, risk management, and the chief medical officer. They had my report in front of them, along with statements from the rapid response team. Every word backed up what I had documented. The CMO kept rubbing his forehead, frustration visible. He looked like a man caught between what was right and what was politically inconvenient. Eventually, he said, "This cannot continue." It was the first time I felt a spark of hope. They questioned me for details, timeline, vitals, the doctor's exact phrasing, the tone he used. They wanted precision. And I had it. Nurses always have it. We live in details. Risk management thanked me for speaking up, but their tone suggested caution. Administration assured me follow-up would occur, but their tight expressions hinted at the behind-the-scenes chaos this would cause. Still, progress is progress. Later that evening, I checked on Daniel again. He was moving around better, eating small meals, alert and talkative. When he saw me, he smiled. "You look tired," he joked gently. I laughed softly. "It's been a week." He studied my face for a moment, then said, "I don't know what happened that night, but I can tell you cared." I swallowed hard. "You scared us," I admitted. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You don't need to be sorry," I said. "You did everything right." He hesitated before asking, "Was it serious?" I paused. I wanted to shield him, but not lie. "It could have been," I said carefully. "But you're doing well now. That's what matters." He reached out, placing his hand lightly over mine. "Thank you." Those 2 words hit me again, because that's the heart of nursing. You fight for people who don't even know a battle was happening. About 2 weeks after the incident, the doctor was temporarily removed from direct patient care. Officially, it was framed as a review period. Unofficially, everyone knew something had finally caught up with him. Rumors circulated, meetings with medical boards, internal investigations, staff testimonials. Nurses who had been afraid to speak up finally came forward. Their statements painted a picture far worse than anything I had expected. Years of questionable decisions, countless near misses, a trail of dismissed concerns. It wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern woven into his practice. Eventually, word spread. He was placed on restricted duties, under supervision, with required retraining. Some wanted more severe consequences. Honestly, so did I. But seeing real action, even partial, felt like a victory in a system where accountability can be rare. The night before Daniel was discharged, he called me to his room. He looked healthier, stronger, ready to go home. He said, "I don't know what you did or what happened, but I feel like you saved my life." I tried to brush it off. "I was just doing my job." He shook his head. "No, you cared enough to pay attention. That matters." We talked for a few minutes. Nothing heavy, nothing dramatic. Just a human moment between someone who had almost died and someone who refused to let that happen. After he left the hospital, I stood alone in his empty room. The bed neatly made, monitors silent, curtains open. I took a deep breath and let the quiet settle. Because sometimes the impact of what we do only hits once the chaos fades. People think nursing is all about skills, stamina, procedures, and yes, those matter. But what really keeps patients alive, what truly saves lives, is vigilance. It's intuition. It's catching the thing no one else noticed. It's standing up to someone powerful because you know the patient deserves better. It's protecting the vulnerable, even when it puts a target on your back. And that night, I understood something I'll carry with me forever. Not all threats come from disease. Some come from negligence disguised as authority. Daniel walked out of the hospital alive because of a team that refused to let ego win. And I walked out changed, more alert, more outspoken, more unwilling to accept that's just how things are, because that mindset can cost lives. Before I finish, let me say this directly. If you have a loved one in the hospital, be their advocate. Ask questions. Double-check things. Speak up. Nurses do everything they can, but sometimes the system is bigger than us. Having a voice from the outside can make a difference bigger than you think. Thank you for staying with me through this story. It wasn't easy to tell, and it still sits heavy on my chest. But some stories need to be spoken so others can learn, prepare, and maybe prevent something like this from happening again. And truly, thank you for watching until the end. It means more than you know. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who cares about real experiences inside the healthcare world. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Thank you once again for being here. And until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and take care of yourselves.